Hi, I'm Leslie Grandy, and I'm about to have a productive conversation with Mike Vardy.
Leslie, thanks so much for taking the time to join me today for a productive conversation.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, I want to talk about like creative velocity. I saw the book title. I'm like, okay, this is something I want to get into, especially is in relation to the fact that we were just talking before we hit record, uh, in that I write when I walk now. I'm finding I'm getting so many ideas when I'm in motion, and it kind of is a nice dovetail into it because I literally just spewed out an entire, all the bullet points and things of a chapter of the next book I'm working on. But how do you define creative velocity in the context of time and attention, and as you would expect me to ask, productivity?
Well, for me, I've thought of creative velocity throughout the book as a way to activate your creative thinking by knowing your triggers, by using frameworks, and by having at your fingertips the capacity to explore and generate novel ideas that are both meaningful and valuable. And so it's the last part that really takes the attention and intention. I think we can spew a lot of ideas all the time, but to really be creative and for them to really have impact is what's important. And it's the human differentiator because humans bring the meaning and value to whatever they experience. And so it's that combination of novelty and exploration of solutions that maybe hadn't existed before. But then it's also the iteration and evaluation of those ideas into something that's meaningful and purposeful for an audience, a customer, or even for yourself.
I've talked to Todd Henry about the idea of creatives and professionals not thinking of themselves as creative. And why do you think, I'll pose the question to you, why do you think so many professionals, we'll start there, feel like they're not, quote, creative?
So I think there's two main reasons. The first is we've delineated jobs that we call creative jobs, right? So design, marketing, people think of those people as being responsible for the creative in a business. And so I think there's a kind of a unspoken class system that occurs with that, which is I need to defer to people who have been hired to be creative because I've been hired to process workflows and handle paperwork and operational challenges or to build things. And so the creative class within companies can sometimes degrade one's self-esteem or creative self-efficacy because you don't believe you've been deemed creative by your job classification. So that's one reason in companies. But for me, and I think for the large part of people that I've spoken to over the course of writing the book, I, I didn't think I was creative because I thought it was a talent and an art-based capacity. I thought that people who were perceived to be creative had talent in art, were able to perform, write, create art, and it was a natural ability you had or you didn't. And I think so many people don't appreciate that they can be creative throughout the day with a million choices that they make. And if they apply that creativity, they might make better choices. They might have better outcomes. They might actually break cycles that are not necessarily as productive for them because they can look at how those habits are working against their creative capacity. And so I think a lot of us fall into the trap of believing the myths of creativity.
John Cleese said, I love bringing this one up too.
I love this video. I know exactly where you're going with it
Where
because
I'm going.
it's timeless.
Yep.
It's a timeless video.
Because see, people get, when they think about productivity and they think about time, they think about those things those are the things you manage. You got to manage your ability to be productive and you got to manage time. But it's that space factor too, that people, they don't, is it because they can't see it? Is it because they don't value it? Like, what are some of the things people can do to kind of, because you need that space. The time is the one element, right? Like if we don't have enough time, then we feel rushed, et cetera, et cetera. But it's that constraint of space. And I think if you don't have space, then how can velocity even take hold? Because you have nowhere to go, right?
100%. And, I think people make the idea of space bigger than it needs to be. And by that, I mean, I get some of my best ideas in the shower.
Mhm.
I am so pure of thought when I'm in there. I'm not hearing any other voices. I'm letting my mind wander. I'm connecting the dots between my subconscious and my conscious. And then I have to remember when I get out of the shower what I covered. I have to, be intentional at capturing those ideas. But that space exists in my day, and I just use it, right, in an effective way. I use it in a way that releases some of the have tos and tasks and activity operational based thinking that maybe consumes my space. And I don't use my task list as the basis for my shower time.
Right.
Right?
Right.
It's sort of sometimes surprising what pops into my head that I am starting to, noodle over in the shower. It might not have been a thought that was most recent in the day. It might have been something I thought about yesterday that I want to, I want to consider where we're going to spend Thanksgiving this year. It
Right.
might have been that,
Yep.
right? It might not have even been a work thing. And I just put it away somewhere in the back of my mind. And then the shower, it pops up saying, hey, have we thought about doing this? We should talk about, right? So the idea that space can exist in your day, if you think about it as a possible trigger for you, walking is a trigger,
Yep.
right? For some people, long runs are the trigger, right? Sometimes that's what you do. Other people, it's things like needlepoint, where you have to use enough of your brain, right, to
Yep.
actively produce the output, but not so much of your brain that you are obsessed with every little movement of your hand, and
You
that
know,
you're able then to wander through that time freely.
well, and I think the thing that you're also illustrating here is that um we are truly creative because we don't think linearly naturally, right? And that to me is proof enough of the creativity that lives within us innately that only humans really can do because that's why we use tools. And we'll get into AI a little bit later, but
Yeah.
the tools are what compartmentalize and allow us to filter it. But up here in our brains, that is not where that happens. So if we can remember that, you know, why are we taking things that come into our head in a nonlinear way and going, okay, well, let's work on them sequentially. It's clearly a mistake. And that's maybe where that's the intersection of time and space, right?
Well, I totally agree with everything you said, and I would further say that our training to be productive is based on task lists.
Yes.
How much we accomplish, right? Being able to check the box on the things we said we would do, doing them as well as we said or better than we thought we could do. And in our jobs, we do that. In our home life, I got to make dinner, I got to go grocery shopping, I've got things to do. And so the task lists consume our conscious mind, and they crowd our daily thinking with like you say, linear activities. I
Mhm.
gotta go grocery shopping before I can make dinner, right? Then I've got to clean the dishes after I do dinner, right? So I think in that fashion because I've been oriented to that task list. But I think what happens is when we're obsessed with task lists, we create less space, to your earlier point, to let our mind wander, because we think mind wandering may be wasteful,
Right.
may not be time well spent given the tasks that are on my list. I interviewed one person for the book, I think, Jason Silva. I loved his version of this because he said, "I know that if I obsess about tasks, I will never give time to creative things. So my morning is all about activities I know I have to get done, and I spend no time doing anything other than those activities, and then in the afternoon, I leave time so I can walk away from those activities and explore new things." And I think that's an extreme example, but I think it's exactly the point, right?
Well, that's just it. By the way, you mentioned Jason. That was something I highlighted. Flow lives beyond boredom and anxiety, and at the intersection of discipline and surrender, which is kind of tied
Yeah.
in nicely to what you just
Yep.
what you said. He just
Yeah, no, and that's why I loved having him in the book because I think he has found this sweet spot that we all try to achieve, right? Which is balance between the I have to do and I want to do.
yeah.
And I find it inspirational for me to continue. I'm not as purist about it as he is, but I love that he is because it gives me inspiration.
Do you think that, and this is dovetailing on the very ideas that I was noodling on while I was on my walk before we stepped up to the microphones here. Do you think that precision can stunt creative velocity or improve it or augment it?
That's such a great question. If you're talking about precision as like perfectionism, or if you're talking about precision as detail orientation, I might answer differently. So if you talk about precision as this sense that I have to be precisely accurate and correct in this level of perfectionism, which is maybe maladaptive,
Right.
okay? That I don't think is at all helpful to creative velocity. I think when you are maladaptive at perfectionism, you're unwilling to iterate because you only want to do it if you could do it 100% correctly and absolutely understand that it will work. And I think that's unhealthy. So I do believe, though, that adaptive perfectionism, where you're able to actually iterate to get to the right answer, is incredibly essential to creative velocity. On the flip side, if I think about precision as it relates to attention to detail, I think there's an adaptive and maladaptive way to think about that. I think details are what matters and where meaning lives, and being aware of the details and thoughtful about the details, and even empathetic about how the details create the experience that you're envisioning. I think it's helpful to create velocity because then you're going to have more likelihood that the solutions will land the way you
Right.
expect them.
Yeah.
I think, again, in a maladaptive way, you can't know everything. And if you think you're going to get every detail 100% accurate with what you know at that moment in time, you're going to be wrong. And then you're going to be fearful to do it the next time. And so it'll impede creative velocity because you'll realize that's a practical impossibility and you never get out of the starting gate.
Well,
So I
I
think
think the other
those are,
thing is
like, each of those has a dark side and a bright
sure.
side.
But I think the other thing is, and you alluded to this, is that if we start with the details, we get in trouble.
Yeah, totally. Because then you kind of feel like you're missing the big picture, and that is one of the things I kind of stress, I think, several times in the book, which is you have to stay at the altitude to be that allows you to be open to elements coming from areas you wouldn't have expected. If you get too directive and too in the weeds with the details too prematurely, you are more likely to stay in a zone that is, variant only by a degree or two, and your learning will be more uninformed. You won't really know what part of it would have worked if you'd have had the idea but executed a little differently, right? Because all you'll know is your way didn't work. So I think the idea of altitude, yeah, is important in creative velocity and not coming too quickly into the details of a solution to preclude other insights being valuable and helpful.
I want to talk about emotional regulation
Ugh,
because
yes.
um, I'll give you a personal example. We were just talking about before we hit record my book, The Productivity Diet, that just came out. I mean, if you're listening to this later, it's been out for a while. But the point is that the delays and the both for on my end and elsewhere uh, cause so much friction and really weighed on my emotions to the point where everything got stuck. And as soon as March 13th hit, all of a sudden everything unlocked. So I, to the point where it was almost like a floodgate, which is hilarious to me considering that I thought I had everything in check and I thought things were flowing properly. But it's kind of like, um, you have a sink that's draining and you think, oh, well, this is draining okay. And then all of a sudden you put Drano down or whatever you're going to put down, like, oh, wow, okay, it wasn't draining well at all. It feels like that happened. So what are the roles? Um, like what role does emotional regulation play in not just, I guess, yeah, sustaining that momentum or getting back into the groove, which is what I felt that I've had. And maybe a cautionary tale for me is maybe you can push back to go, okay, Mike, yes, the floodgates are open, but beware of burnout, beware of going too far, because I'm very aware that that could happen too.
Yeah, it's such a, personal thing for me too. This is not a, uh, uh, do as I say, not as I do thing, but
Yeah.
I do struggle with this myself, which is why I've really focused on it because I've recognized I'm as an empath in particular, I can carry someone else's emotions on top of my own. And that can be really burdensome, right? To be somebody who is so sensitive to other people not having the joy that you want to have in the moment that it removes your joy. Right?
Right.
That's a real thing. And I'm always worried about being hurt or hurting someone inadvertently. And so I've had to, through the years, recognize the cost of that in order to change it, because it didn't seem like it was something I could control. And it didn't really, it wasn't clear at the time I was doing it that it had the negative cost. I thought, especially as an empath, I thought it was positive, right? It made people feel supported and it was a good thing. And I think from my perspective, the the importance of it, right, is to allow both emotions to coexist. When I talk about regulation and equanimity, I'm not talking about even just emotional intelligence. I'm just allowing myself to feel good while someone else is feeling bad and not feel guilty about it.
Right.
Or I'm trying to feel okay that this is enough and I need to walk away from something because I'm not a quitter. So, in a lot of ways, for me, emotional regulation is about balancing what I think I should feel versus what I do, and balancing what I can control versus what I can't. And so I use this chat GPT that I created, this GPT, to help remind me, not that it fixes everything, but it just kind of is like shaking the tree and say, hey, don't forget, this is just unique to you and no one else is feeling it. So it's okay that it's personal and you can control it by doing these things. And like, oh, all right, right, that's this type of thing. Or the fact that everyone else is feeling this way and I'm not is something I'm sensitive to. What I can't control how they feel. What should I do? So it just helps remind me that those are kind of the vectors that
Right.
I have to react and understand, which is people could have a different experience than I do, and people are not in my control. So the idea that this is really important to creative velocity is when I'm falling prey to not thinking like that is when I don't come up with the clever solutions. And I'll give you my personal example. It's a total non-professional personal example. The diamond popped out of my engagement ring after 27 years. And I looked at my ring, it was tension out, and I was like, you can imagine, like blood
Mhm.
stopped moving in my body, right? Like, how did that happen? Where did that happen? Oh my God. Like the moment of panic was just physical. Like it really came up to me. And I just said, where was it? Where could it have been? And I opened the drawer that I had just put the laundry in, and it was sitting on top of my yoga pants in the drawer. And I was just like, oh, now I gotta go tell my husband because this ring holds that diamond and it's like the whole ring doesn't work now. So it's not that I lost the diamond. That's not what I'm gonna have to tell him. Now I'm gonna have to tell him like my ring is in two parts. Well, and it's meaningful. It was a meaningful token. It's not even just the cost of it, right? And because I had gotten so relieved at finding the diamond, I was in a calmer state. And I came up and I said, look at this. Did you even know this could happen? And he said, oh, are you? This is great. Now we can get you a new ring. I was like, oh my gosh, he came up with a positive version of that answer. Not that we did, we just fixed it. But like the idea is, I didn't present it to him like it was a catastrophe. And
Right.
so he was more than willing to come back with, oh, great. Now we can go look at new rings. Like it was a positive all around because I presented it as a positive, as opposed to going in there in tears and him having to manage my emotional reaction to it breaking. Right? And so he skipped that step and went right to the good stuff.
Mhm.
And I think that's the thing that you realize is when you take having to deal with the emotion that comes with the thing and the person, now you're having a constructive conversation. It doesn't mean the emotion doesn't exist, but you're not dealing with it, right? You're managing it.
Right. What I love about what you're talking about, Leslie, is you're using terms like equanimity instead of equality. You're using
Yeah.
balance in a way that actually promotes what balance is, which is never 50-50. And
No.
then, the idea of reason, which is basically, for lack of a better term, the middle centric area between logic and emotion.
Yeah.
Why do we struggle so hard to center ourselves in those areas? And again, we try to lean towards either right into the absolute of either side of those, or we fail to, again, this goes probably back to the space argument, take that pause to kind of go, okay, what is a reasoned approach to this? Well, how can I, and again, a quantitative kind of metric as opposed to just purely quantitative, or because going purely qualitative can be a problem too. Just ask George R. R. Martin, who still hasn't finished his Game of Thrones series, right? Like clearly that's got to be I would assume it's a qualitative issue. So I'd love for you to touch on that as well.
If I'm understanding the question properly, and correct me if I'm going off on the wrong tangent here, but for me, I think the value of emotions is still in the mix when we're talking about equanimity. We still want emotion in there. We still want to react to the quality of the experience, right? Whether that means it touches our heart or it touches our mind, we still find importance in the quality of the experience. I think it's about using the emotion more strategically.
Right.
And
The
maybe that's
regulation part. Yeah. As
yeah,
opposed to absolution, like a regulation.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there are times where exploding is the exact right thing to do. It may not be in an airport terminal at TSA. There are probably inappropriate times to do that. But there may be times where it's really appropriate, right? Where you feel like in the context of that moment, it's the only thing to do. It's a statement you need to make. But then be prepared for what comes when you do that, right? And so when you're not regulating it and you're letting it go, you just need to know the consequences of it. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I think it's possible to do it. I think when you do that, though, you paint yourself into a corner and you only have kind of one or two things you can do after that moment, right? So, I think if I look at it for me personally, I'm just trying to keep options open. And equanimity and emotional regulation keeps as many options open for as long as possible before I actually pull the trigger on maybe an explosive reaction.
One of the things that I want to circle back to is the idea of velocity, because I think people get confused of what velocity is too. Much like they get confused of what efficiency is.
Right, right.
I mean, I have people that have come up to me I mean, you mentioned intention and attention off the top. And I mean, anyone who's followed my work knows that I believe productivity is the active link between intention and attention. Like that's what it is. You intend to do something, how are you going to pay attention to it? And the repeated link of that allows you to be productive. Being effective, being efficient, those are byproducts of that.
Right.
So velocity isn't speed on its own. So I would love for you, who's written a book that has velocity in the title, especially when it's got the adjective, what is velocity and where do people get it wrong?
That is the most thoughtful question because I believe that velocity gets confused with, to your point of quantity and quality. I want to tie it back to your quantity and quality piece because I think velocity is too often associated with quantity, right? Rate of speed, high speed. And to me, I think the creative velocity is the predictability, the ability to switch the lever and turn it on, right? And then hit the road running and be able to have control of that pipeline, right? The ability to say, I need to think of problems to solve, and I need to think of solutions for problems I have, because that's my job or that's my life, whatever is the reason. And when you're faced with that moment, you need to be able to have quality time to actually process all the options, to think of new options, to consider analogies that might be relevant and might give you a different perspective or an insight, and then pick up the pace of, well, I could do this. Let's explore that. So to me, the velocity really comes from the things that you're pointing out along this interview. One is the space and time, but then also the intention and the ability with self-awareness to turn that switch on. And I think the velocity, you can't hit velocity unless you own the switch, unless you know what your triggers are, unless you know how to activate your flow state, unless you know how to manage your emotions, unless you know how to do those things, you will never get to the switch and you'll never be able to turn it on at will. And to me, that's what I really think of when I think of creative velocity. Hopefully that came through the book as well.
It definitely. I think the interesting thing too is your talk about AI, because I think a lot of people when they think about AI, again, we get back to the absolutes. Ugh, I use it for everything. Oh, I'm not going to use that. And I find, I mean, people who've listened to the show before, follow my work, know how I'm using AI, and it sounds like we're very on a similar bent. How can AI help that creative velocity, and where, for those that are concerned, when they start hearing about privacy and there's that fear around that, I wonder if you could share like some insights as to what people, maybe to allay some of those worries and fears, but also one that I'm curious about is, are people afraid that it might unlock something that they don't want to have unlocked?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really encountered that perspective that it's going to uh, open a door to a dark cave I don't want to go into or something like that, that it's going to give me something I can't control or I can't manage. I've really thought in the context of the book of AI as a creative collaborator,
Right.
and and to allay allay my own concerns, I find that structured frameworks make it a lot less run likely that it's going to run amok.
Hmm.
And I think that's part of the premise of the book is if you want to see how you can improve your own creative capacity, practice these exercises with a partner and use AI as that partner because they're as distant from the problem as you could possibly want, which will help you see how to explore areas you're not familiar with. And that's part of achieving creative velocity is understanding how to go into places you wouldn't expect to find the unexpected answer. And
Right.
that I think is what AI is great at. And if you use a structured framework, it's not going to be chaos. It's going to understand the framework like Scamper. Okay, I want to first substitute a material. What material would you suggest I substitute in making this product lighter?
Hmm.
Right? And then it might come up with 3 ideas I already had and one that I didn't. Okay, great. Well, that was worth the exercise of typing in a prompt like that. Let's try to combine things. And so it just now expands my field of vision because my own experiences may limit me to looking in certain corners of the world.
Right.
And so I feel that the thing that I'm trying to get through to people in the book about creative thinking with a partner that is a generative AI tool is actually amplifying what you would do anyway. And I think it's also potentially bringing insights you wouldn't have found or looked in places you wouldn't have looked, which really is the openness and curiosity you need to have a creative mindset. So if you're going to go down that path, you want it to bring back the absurd. You want it to bring back the things you hadn't thought about because it's going to at least let you say, all right, I consider that prospect. And when I was writing the book, a lot of times I would take the exercises in the book and put them in to see how it did them. And I was fascinated how they thought about the exercises. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great because people will have different experiences when they use these exercises because of what they want to solve is the problem with AI.
I found
And
that
so it,
experience. I found that
right?
experience. But yeah, because I think the interesting thing is you've got a framework that is universally applicable to anyone who wants to use it. But your point is that the feedback that you're going to get, the responses are going to be unique to you because of what you're
Your
giving it.
problem set, your problem space, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish or build or do.
Yep.
And I think that's what's been so fascinating to me is that uh, the unexpected is where the time is well spent for me.
Hmm.
If it's just giving me back what I already know, then it's not helpful and it's not enhancing my experience. The other part of it is it's bringing back all of this stuff, but it's up to me to decide what's meaningful and valuable to my audience, what's meaningful and valuable to me personally, what purpose it would have. I did a quick exercise where I suggested I wanted to do a combinatorial exercise, and I said, take a colander and a toothpick and make a product out of it. Combine these two products. In my head, the reason I picked those two products was because I'm constantly using a toothpick to take things out of the holes in the colander
Hmm.
that gets where food gets stuck. I'm using it to clean it. That's my tool for cleaning it. But I wondered if it would think of that. It came up with 15 things I would have never thought of. Not that are worth building. It would have been up to me to decide what of those things were, but it didn't even come up with the one I had in mind.
Yep.
And so just the idea that now the solution space is broader for me to look at is really, I think, what's so enhancing about using a chat GPT or your favorite AI tool to expand your own field of vision.
You know what else is, I mean, this actually is funny, and I've used it enough where I've said, or it said, "Would you like me to help you with this now?" I'm like, "No, I'm gonna take a break. I need to take a mental break. I need to step back for a minute." And it's like, "Okay, I'll be like," because the one thing it is devoid of is actual emotion, fatigue. It doesn't
Totally.
get tired. It does, but, um, once you start, I have so many people that have said, "Oh, you should just treat it this way. Like, it's just a tool." I'm like, I've started to give it the, like, when it says, "Do you want to?" I'm like, "No, I'm going to take a break." Like, I actually talk to it, like you pointed out, like a partner. And it goes, "Yep, I'll be here when you're ready. You've made some," and it'll even occasionally be like, "You've made some really great progress here. I'm glad that we've done," like, I get that feedback. And it's a really interesting feedback loop, because not only does it's a reflective thing, because it's only
Totally.
giving what I gave it. And I think that the fear a lot of people have, at least in my through conversations, is that they're going to give it too much information, and they'll use that information will be used elsewhere for nefarious purposes or what have you. Um, and okay, maybe that's a valid concern. Maybe it isn't. But if it is, it doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe
Totally.
you just remove, like, there's certain things I certainly would not put into a generative AI tool, like that has important data that I don't necessarily, but that's the space. That's the
Right.
pause that you take to go, okay, well, and you've got that framework that you've built in there, which is carefully considered, conscientious. And I think the other thing is, when you read the book, you can modify this stuff. Like, what you've given is like, here's a baseline. Now, again, like anything, like the Bruce Lee idea, take what's useful, discard what isn't, and add your own, right?
Totally. And for me, one of the things I really do enjoy, as you pointed out, I'm with you on this, is the conversationality of it. Because instead of talking inside my own head and being an echo chamber, or, to validate my thinking, it's actually asking me different questions. It's actually taking it. I'll ask it a question thinking I've expressed it very clearly, and it goes off in a different tangent. And I realize, oh, I haven't actually written a good problem statement. If you took it that way, I wrote a bad problem statement. And so it's really helpful because it isn't attached to my ideas. And then when I say, no, think of it in these terms, and I'm like, oh, well, if I think of it in those terms, this is what I would say. And so I feel like I'm, again, from a conversational perspective, more naturally ideating and iterating, right? And evolving my thinking. And then at the same time, when garbage comes back, I can acknowledge the garbage and say, you got it wrong. Here's why I think that's wrong. And it'll say, oh, I missed this piece of information. So I find the conversationality, like you talk, is as helpful, right, in that creative process.
Last question for you, and this is another one I think that's helpful with the AI piece is, I have found it's more of a statement question combo, is because I work on my own. I mean, I have my team that, but they're remote. This partnership has allowed me, from a personal vantage point, to not drive my wife insane with some of my own ideas that she could care less about. Have you experienced something similar?
I totally, when I wrote the book, I didn't give the book to my husband till I was done. Didn't give the book to my husband till I was done. I wrote the book and I gave it to Notebook LM to make a podcast of it. And I wanted to hear what it picked out of a 250-page book
Mhm.
as the topic of a podcast. It came up with a 23-minute podcast. And I was like, okay, this is the feedback I wanted. I wanted somebody who didn't know me, who didn't have any attachment to me. Because I thought my husband would just say it was good because he wanted to be supportive and he's that kind of guy. But I wanted it to go somewhere and then hear back in somebody else's voice what it took from it. And it was so helpful for me because I thought, oh, that's great. It got the highlights. It's interesting. It picked these things out. So as part of my iterative process, it was really like giving it to a stranger. And I think I got more out of that feedback than from somebody who knew me, who maybe couched the wording or, tried to pick the things they wanted to point out, that struck them. But this was completely unattached to me. And in that way, really reflective of what somebody who didn't know me or didn't know my intention would get out of the book. And that was the highlight for me of using AI as a collaborative partner because I realized what things were emphasized and I was okay with that.
Leslie, it's been a great conversation. The book is called Creative Velocity: Propelling Breakthrough Ideas in the Age of Generative AI. Where can people pick up the book and keep up with the work that you're doing?
It's so creative-velocity.com is my website. You can buy directly from there. And if you want to buy for your team, we have bulk pricing and packages as well. But it's available at all the major retailers. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. I think probably Chapters has a copy of it. All the places you would imagine. It's available starting May 6th. So by the time this comes out, people will be able to probably buy it off of any bookseller.
Leslie, thanks for having a productive conversation with me today.
It was so productive. I actually learned a lot from your questions, so I really appreciate that.